everyone. Thanks for joining me here on Mom Squad. This is a show where we talk all things parenting. I'm Maureen Kyle, and today we're talking about that crazy fall schedule juggle. This is where the kids are getting back into the routine of homework, practices, and extracurriculars. And it's a really hard shift to go from those lazy days of summer to full speed learning. So if you're finding yourself struggling with homework meltdowns, you're not alone. We talked to Laura Linn Knight, a parenting expert and former educator, about how to find that balance and how to time out exactly when your child should be doing their homework. If you could tell me a little bit about your background and how you became such an expert in early education and homework therapy that we all need.
Well, thank you. I actually really like to refer to myself as an educator, not necessarily an expert, because I am a parenting educator and I was a former elementary school teacher. And really, I came about my work in sort of a humbling way because I loved being a teacher and I loved having my 20 to 25 kids in my classroom. And I felt like they listened really well and they were responsive and we had such a good rapport. And I always wanted to become a mother, and then I had my own 2 children, and all of a sudden there were power struggles and they were talking back and I was reacting to them, and I was so taken aback because I really never thought that I would have those kinds of problems with my kids because I was such an educator at heart and I just loved working with children so much. So I started down a path to kind of figure out, okay, what are the best parenting practices? How is that similar to what's in the classroom, and how is that different? What tools can I actually use right in this moment of a meltdown? What can I do that's really practical right now, not so much theoretical, but I needed really practical tools and advice. And the more I learned, the more, of course, I wanted to teach.
We all need that go-to person, and especially when it comes to, you brought up homework struggles, which is why we're talking today.
Yes.
And I have one in 3rd grade, one in 1st, and then a preschooler. So I'm not even in the depths of homework struggles, but I'm already seeing it. I'm already trying to figure out what works best for kids. And sometimes my 3rd grader, she loves to do her homework on the bus or right when she gets home, but then I notice some stress levels. When do you think kids should be thinking about doing their homework?
And you and I are similar. So I have a 1st grader also, and I have a 4th grader. And it's amazing kind of how much homework we've even had, even up at this point, right? Where they are so little and you think, okay, I'm not even there yet. And at the same time, I'm still already noticing this increase of stress, or it's a little bit hard for them, or even if they like it, it's still weighing on them. And really, if we think about the school day, I, as a former elementary school teacher, I remember how exhausted I was by the end of the day, because we're always learning, we're academically learning, we're socially learning, we're emotionally learning. And so our kids, although they might be having an amazing experience at school, they're really just using their brain and their bodies so much, and then finally they get home after a very long day at school, and it's kind of like, hurry up, let's get on to our homework now. And so what I say to a lot of parents is, where's the time to decompress? Where's the time in the child's schedule where they can sit down on the ground and just get out their Lego, or sit down on the ground and play, or go outside and kick the soccer ball, or just do something to kind of just let all of that go from school and then move on to homework.
And do you think this applies to teens too?
Absolutely, because I think teens, their brains are developing even more. They have even more of that social and emotional going on at school. And so to come straight home and just launch into the homework routine can just be really taxing and tiring on them. And what I hear from a lot of families is they're sick of the power struggle that ensues because of the homework. So parents are saying, you need to do your homework and you need to do your homework now. And then the children are pushing back, or maybe they're not, but then they're getting whiny and you don't want them to be whiny. whiny. And then all of a sudden, there you are. You haven't seen your child all day. It's finally an opportunity to connect with them, to spend time with them. And you're in an argument or you're in a fight. And we don't want to be that way as parents. We don't want to have that dynamic with our children. So giving them some space and time before they enter in is going to make it easier for you too. What I see is that those power struggles greatly decrease because everyone's just a little bit more grounded, if you will, like just more in their own space and has more capacity after they've had a bit of a break after school.
Right. Laura, let me ask you too, since we're in the same phase of parenting, I'm just starting all of the after school activities. This was our first year of a lot of after school sports. So I felt like the rush was, okay, wait, do a little homework now because then you have to go here and then we're going to eat and then you have to finish your homework after dinner. And so it felt like we were constantly rushing, but because the evenings are so busy.
It's true. There's such a balance, and there's, we do the sports and we do the music, and then you kind of add it all up, and they're at school all day, and it's kind of, when is there time for homework? And when is there time for even to sit down and have dinner? And so I really suggest for families that they sit down with their children or their child and you say, okay, this is our schedule. We have homework. We have these after school activities. I know you're at school. Let's come up with a game plan. Let's find a solution for how homework is going to fit best in our family and feel best for you. Now, some children might say, I want to do it on the bus on the way home, or I want to do it the second I walk in the door. And if your child wants to do that and that works well for your family, that's wonderful. Use that method. But what I find is most children say, I want a bit of a break. And yes, I will do, X, Y, and Z in my homework. Maybe it's my math homework, or maybe I can do my 20 minutes of reading on the way to sports. But really, I need a snack and I want to have just a little bit of playtime with you as my parent. And then, or just I want to hang out with you as my parent if they're older. And then, yes, let's go do our activity, or let's do homework as soon as we get home before we have dinner. And there's no easy way because we can't add time to the day. I wish we could. We could just kind of extend it and give those extra hours. And the last thing I'll say about after school activities is if you find your child can't get their homework done and they're melting down and it's a struggle, then it's a time to reevaluate how many after school activities you're doing, because sometimes we just can't do it all. I think that's a lesson we are learning as parents and that we get to teach our children.
Right. I know. If we're exhausted, the kids are probably exhausted too.
Yes.
I want to talk about that time before bed too, because I know a lot of families, especially ones that have extracurricular activities, then the homework's getting pushed to that twilight hour where they are exhausted and now they're just starting a project. Can that be detrimental to not only the schoolwork, but just their effort that they're putting into it?
It really can be so hard on them. I mean, I love how you said those twilight hours. When my kids were little, my mom would come over and help with them, and she would call it the witching hour.
Yeah.
And we would always laugh because it was like, oh yes, this is a very, very hard time of the day for everyone, because we're just so stretched and we're so exhausted and we're tired. And are we really learning if we're doing our project in that hour, if we're racing to get things done right before bed? And what message are we teaching children when we do that? Are we teaching them to check the boxes? Is that what the intention of homework is? Is it just another box to be checked? Or, really the intention of homework is that we want to reiterate what they're learning in school. And it's actually an opportunity for us as parents to have insight into what they are doing at school, kind of gauge where they are, if they need extra support. And it can be a really special time for us to actually spend time with them. I think that's a misconception for many of us that we just need to get homework done. Yeah. Like, let's just clear that off our plate. But actually, it's a time that we get to bond and connect. So if that is a hard hour for you, then again, we have to go back and reevaluate when can homework be done? And does that mean less of an after school activity? Is that one day a week? Or can you ask your teacher for homework on Mondays and Tuesdays because you know the rest of the week is busy? Can they give it to you ahead of time so that your child can get it done ahead of time? Is your school flexible? So being really curious about homework can often help solve a lot of the major problems that we see.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I do want to bring up too, because having your educator background, I mean, you've been in the front of the classroom, you know how kids learn, you know how involved to get. So how involved should parents be? Because even though my kids are in those early grades, I'm always kind of trying to be carefully walking that line of how much do I help, because I want them to learn the material, but then, I don't want to do their projects for them and I don't want to do their homework for them, but they do need help sometimes. And if they're really struggling, how do you walk that balance?
It is a fine balance to walk. And some children, they come home and they really don't need any help and they don't need support. And then they can sit there and they can do their homework. And still, even though I have children that are very much like that, where they don't need a ton of scaffolding from me, I don't have to always do a lot, I still like to be there and be present because I know that that's time that we have together. And so I'll still sit with them. And when I'm sitting with them, what I love is that they'll often share little bits and pieces about their day, or they'll say, oh yeah, I'm doing this for homework, and oh, it reminded me of what we did at school. And I kind of get to connect with them and hear more about, what is happening for them. So no, I don't think parents should be doing all of their child's homework. Yes, I think it's an opportunity to still participate and be engaged. And the last thing I'll say is, if you notice that you're sitting with your child and they're really struggling through their homework, then again, it's time to go back to the teacher, because homework in its intention is meant to be a review of what a child has already learned and not a brand new teaching.
So if you are seeing some signs, what do you think are some of those red flags that your child is really struggling, and it's not just that this one particular assignment is overwhelming, or that they're having a rough week in terms of activities? What is a sign that we should go to a teacher and ask for help or some extra support?
It's a great question. If you are noticing that your child is having those nightly meltdowns around homework and they are just mustering to get it done, or they're bringing home a book from school and they are younger, of course, this would be a younger child, but they just are missing so many words on the page and they're not comprehending what they're reading. When we're seeing that, that's the time to go to a teacher and say, hey, I noticed that homework is really hard for my child at home. What are you seeing in the classroom? How can I support them at home? Do we need to, do something different with what they're being assigned at home because it's too much for them? And hopefully, your teacher is going to help work with your child because they want them to thrive and succeed as well.
And before I let you go, I do want to ask, because I feel like every parent leans on the bribe, well, if you do your homework, then you get candy or you get some screen time. Is that a motivator, or should we be motivating them in different ways and getting them excited about the actual work instead of the reward?
I mean, all of us love a little bit of a reward, right? Yeah. And so that's very common for parents. I think the trap that parents get into is, if you're motivating for homework, then suddenly you're motivating for going to bed on time, and then you're motivating to do the sport, and then you're motivating, and for the next thing, and then the list never ends, and your child is so, they're just learning that it's always an external reward, and they're seeking that to do the next thing. And so the long-term consequences of that can be unhelpful for your child. And so to cultivate an internal motivation of, talking about why we do homework and what's important about homework. And really, if you're present during homework and you make homework fun, I always say about homework, like, my husband does such a better job making homework fun than I do. I'll own that. Like, he can just be a little bit more silly. And I am, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, all right, but I got to get dinner done and I have other things that I need to do. And he can be really present and be silly and goofy. But I've learned that from him of, oh, let's make this a little bit fun. And when we're doing our spelling words, I get out whiteboards and I let them use expo markers, and just finding ways to make it more engaging in the moment rather than let's get through this so you can have your prize. It's kind of like, let's make this a little bit more fun and a little bit more special. And then that in itself is the prize.
A big thank you to Laura Linn Knight for her insight on how to make the most of homework time. Are you struggling with the balance? Chat with us about it on our Mom Squad with Maureen Kyle Facebook page. That's where you can find stories and connect with other moms. Thanks again for joining us here on Mom Squad. We'll see you right back here next time.